Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I want to introduce our special guest today on the request of our residents. We have Sheldon Whitehouse, Senator, for us coming here today. We have some questions that we drew up that you guys came up with to ask Mr. Whitehouse. So I'll let him say a few words.
Great.
And then we'll get into the questions. And we'll try to keep it brief because he's got a very busy schedule, I'm sure. And we'll go from there. So,
great.
Senator Whitehouse, thank you for coming, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you all so much for having me in here to Atria, which is so beautiful. It's fun to be back. And I'm lucky to be here on Lobster Roll Day. That's pretty good. You know you're on Rhode Island when it's Lobster Roll Day for lunch. So that's a wonderful thing. I guess the point that I would try to lead with, and then we can go to your questions. My wife always says everybody has more fun the sooner I shut up. So I've learned from her over the years. I think she's probably right, so I've learned to try to keep it a little bit brief. So I'll just say that I'm very determined to make sure that we protect Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security at virtually all costs. For a long time, there have been little raids attempted on Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security. There was the effort to change the increases. They called it chained CPI, which I don't know what that meant to everybody, but it meant that the rates didn't increase fast enough. We fought that back. That was actually a fight against a Democratic president to stop that. And that shows how determined I am to defend these programs. And now we have had a very big tax bill pass the Senate that has added several $1 trillion to our national debt. They didn't bother to offset the tax cuts with anything, they just cut the taxes, so up goes the debt. So the Republicans are now working on a plan to solve that problem by going after what they call these programs, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security. They call them the entitlements. And I'm very determined to defend those programs at all costs. But it's a pretty strong push that they're putting on. The Speaker of the House at one point looked at cutting Medicaid and said to a person he was talking with, this is the day that I've been dreaming of, cutting Medicaid, since we were drinking out of kegs in college. Now, I don't know about you, but when I was drinking out of kegs in college, I wasn't thinking about cutting Medicaid. I was probably thinking about what girls were around. I was probably thinking about where the next keg might be. But if you're in college drinking out of a keg and thinking about how to cut Medicaid, you're pretty determined. So we have to be pretty determined fighting back as well. And it's the same with Medicare and Social Security. They have announced that the way they're going to pay back the tax cuts is by going after these programs, Medicare and Social Security. So we are really determined not to let that happen. And the good news is that I think there's actually a lot of bipartisan support for protecting against that in Congress. We are actually not as partisan as you think in the Senate. The news talks about partisanship, 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 and the news always looks at fights. But there are actually some things that are going on that are working pretty well. I'll mention one big thing, then I'll mention one little thing, and then we'll do questions. Does that sound reasonable? Okay, so the big thing is funding the U.S. government. There isn't much bigger that Congress has to do than to fund the U.S. government. And since the president has been in office, we've had to do it twice now. We've had two what are called spending bills, omnibus spending bills, and we're working on the third one right now. Right now it's being prepared. And in both of those, we got very good bipartisan spending bills. We got a lot of the stuff that we wanted as Democrats. We protected things like Meals on Wheels, which the administration had said they were going to get rid of. And it actually turned out that those were very bipartisan efforts. The Republicans didn't like this administration's budget any more than we did. So they basically told this administration, look, you run along and we'll work this out here in Congress. And that's what we did. And the spending bills have been good. And I think the next one is going to be good as well. So that was very bipartisan. It was very friendly. Congressmen and senators working together, Republicans and Democrats working together, and we got it done. Then something small. Here we are in the Ocean State, and I don't know if you've been seeing the news, but plastic debris in the ocean, plastic waste in the ocean has become a really big issue. It's turning up on our beaches. We have to do beach cleanups. It's turning up in the stomachs of whales. It's turtles and other creatures are getting entangled in it. So we wanted to do something about marine plastic debris. There'd never been any legislation before. So I asked a senator from Alaska to help me do a marine plastic debris bill, a Republican senator from Alaska. Well, Alaska's got a lot of coastline. So they've got a lot of plastic on their beaches. So he was happy to help, and we worked together in a bipartisan fashion, and we got that bill, and it passed the Senate unanimously. Not a single person objected. It went straight through. The House just passed it, through committee, and we're waiting for the House to take it up and pass it, and we'll have a new law to protect our oceans from marine debris. And it was done totally bipartisan. So that was pretty good news. I work a lot on climate change and protecting our oceans and our coasts from that. And the person who is my worst adversary, my nemesis on climate change is a guy from Oklahoma named Jim Inhofe. And when we were doing the marine plastic debris bill, believe it or not, Jim Inhofe, my #1 enemy on climate change, said, you know, I like your bill on marine plastic debris. I want to be an original co-sponsor right from the very get-go. How about that? So we fight each other over here, but we work together over here. And that's kind of the way the Senate is. And the reason he wanted to be on that bill is because when he was a little boy, he used to go down to the Texas shore. And there are little sea turtles that come out of their shells, and they've got to go down the beach to get to the ocean. And he would go out as a boy and protect those little sea turtles as they came out of their shells and went down to the shore. So although we may disagree on climate change and other things, he's got a soft spot in his heart for sea turtles. And so that's my closing lesson to all of you. If you have somebody who's your adversary, if you have somebody who you disagree with, look for their inner sea turtle. You may find there's something they agree with you on. So thank you, and I'm more than happy to take your questions. Thank you for having me here, and it's a real pleasure for me.
Okay, our first question is from Lorraine Dennis.
I'm not used to using a microphone. Is this okay?
It's great.
I have an 18-year-old granddaughter who's going to vote for the first time this November. And we all know how important that vote is going to be, her vote and all the other votes, if we're going to get any change in Congress. And she said, Grandma, what is the difference between the two parties? You know, where do you begin?
Where do you begin?
And my question to you, and maybe admonition, is I'm not sure that the Democrats are getting out the message, and particularly to young people who are coming up to vote. You have to tell them what the difference is and where you stand. And I'm just wondering, are there concentrated efforts going on in advance of the election so that message will get out?
There are concentrated efforts going on in advance of the election to reach out to young voters. And the issues that matter the most to young voters, first of all, they care a lot about everybody being treated fairly. There's never been a generation of Americans that was less prejudiced than this young generation that is coming on. They believe in, everybody should be treated fairly, and they have very, very little sympathy for bigotry, for intolerance, for discrimination. So that's a very, very important issue for them. People who are gay, people who are African American, people who are immigrants, they have much more sensitivity to them than previous generations had. And it's a really strong feeling in that generation. The second is they're really strong on the environment. They really want us to make sure we take care of this planet that they are going to inherit. And so they're pushing really hard, and they're really interested when you talk to them about the planet and about climate change and about the environment. And the third thing is guns. This is a generation, I don't know, some of you probably remember having to do duck and cover and go under your desk and prepare for like a nuclear bomb that was going to go off. And for this generation, they're doing active shooter drills in school. Little kids this high are having to do active shooter drills in their schools. So even if they don't know anybody who's been shot in school, even if there hasn't been a school shooting in their neighborhood or even in their state, this is something that the young people are really active and concerned about. and particularly those kids from Parkland in Florida who've been such good ambassadors and such good advocates for common sense gun safety reforms. I think those are three big issues that we're going to be talking to them on a lot. Once they get a little older, they start to care a lot about college debt. And I don't know how many of you might have co-signed a loan for a child or a nephew or a grandchild, but it isn't just the kids who are concerned about college loans. It's also people who've co-signed. So we have a whole array of really strong points to communicate to young people about the things that really matter to them. And on every single one of those issues, there's a very big difference between the parties. Absolutely clear difference between the two parties. Great question, thank you.
What are the differences?
Well, we're trying to get gun safety measures passed. The Republicans won't do a single thing. We're trying to do climate legislation. The Republicans won't do a single thing. We've tried to lower the cost of student loans, and we got fought by them. And I think on a lot of the race and discrimination issues, particularly this president is not setting a very kind example. He does not seem to be that, correct?
I'm going to read them forward.
Great.
Okay. The next question is, you initiated a lawsuit to hold lead paint manufacturers responsible for the harmful effects of lead poisoning to Rhode Island children. Was this successful?
When I was Attorney General, I filed a suit against the lead paint manufacturers because we had so many kids who were getting poisoned by lead paint around the state. The head of the health department said it was the #1 health issue facing Rhode Island children. And everybody was having to go and have their blood tested, and kids were turning up poisoned. It was a really big deal. So I went after the manufacturers because they had refused to clean up the mess. I talked to them first, and they said they wouldn't help. So then I figured, okay, well, we'll file a complaint and see if they'll help then. It was successful. We won the case in front of the Rhode Island jury, so that was successful. One of the companies settled, so that was successful. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court, our state Supreme Court, threw out the jury verdict. So that was unsuccessful. And it was a first-time thing. And what's happened is that other states have followed suit since then, and the California Supreme Court just upheld a lead paint verdict exactly like the one that we won from the Rhode Island jury. So it looks like we were a bit ahead of our time, and now California has the lead winning case. But I'm still proud of that suit, and I wish the Supreme Court had decided otherwise.
The next question for the residents. Can you expand on the successes by the Rhode Island Quality Institute in helping our healthcare system reward good care and reduce waste?
That's a good technical question. Somebody's paying attention. So again, when I was Attorney General, I brought the hospitals and the doctors and the nurses and the insurance companies all together to say, look, we have to do healthcare better here. We're spending way too much time fighting with each other, and we're not organized. And let's set up an institute for healthcare quality. And so we did. It's called the Rhode Island Quality Institute. It still exists. The first thing that we did was to try to get rid of infections in the intensive care units. People go into an intensive care unit, and very often they get an infection from the equipment in the hospital that hasn't been cleaned enough because all the proper procedures weren't followed and all of that. So that was our first project, and it worked actually very well. The rate of intensive care unit infections went way down. So with that success under our belt, we decided, okay, now let's try to make sure that everybody has a good electronic health record. There was a moment when I heard from a Rhode Islander I knew whose family member had had to be emergency sent up to a hospital in Boston for a specialized procedure, but they hadn't taken their paper files with them. So they had to send another ambulance up with no person in it, just with the files, to try to catch the first ambulance so that the doctors up in Boston would have the paper records. Well, everybody has computers right now. You shouldn't have to be chasing paper files around. You should be able to go and see your records electronically. And so we built an electronic health record apparatus in Rhode Island, and it now even has like a central area where the information gets exchanged. So if you go to one specialist, he sends his information to the Health Information Exchange and it goes into your record. And if you go to another specialist, it goes to the same place and into your record. If you go to the emergency room, it goes into your record. If you go to get an MRI from the imaging people, it goes into your record. And it all happens automatically and easily and safely. So the Quality Institute has done wonderful stuff with those bits of work. And they've also made the people from the hospitals and the doctors and the insurers sit down with each other on a regular basis. So they don't quite fight with each other so much as they used to because they're sitting down on a regular basis. So I'm very happy and pleased with the work of the Rhode Island Quality Institute and with the work that Rhode Island is doing to make better health care for people. Does anybody here get their health care through Coastal Medical? Do you know Coastal Medical Group? So a lot of people here get Coastal Medical. Coastal Medical is a place that we can be incredibly proud of in Rhode Island. They became an accountable care organization, which is a new way of getting paid. And they can only get paid if they save money, but they can't save money by denying you care. They've got to make sure that the care is better. So Coastal actually is the best in the country of all of the practices that entered into that program. They are really, 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 really good. And as you know, they're great to deal with, and the cost per patient is going down. They're saving money by keeping people healthier, which is the ultimate goal. And so that whole push towards healthcare quality is really, really exciting, and we got real leaders in Rhode Island. Every once in a while, people like to give Rhode Island a kick, and I find that, okay, sometimes we deserve it, but we do some great things. And Coastal Medical's leadership on better care for people is something we can be proud of across the country.
What is the Medicare prescription drug donut hole, and how are you fighting to prevent the cutting of benefits for seniors?
I suspect most people here actually know what the donut hole is, or was, I should say, because it's being phased out. It used to be that you got coverage for your prescription drugs for a while, and then you fell into the so-called donut hole, and you lost coverage for prescription drugs until you'd spent a certain amount of money, and then the coverage returned again. So it was like having a hole in a donut. You've got coverage, then a hole, and then more coverage, and that's why it was called the donut hole. Well, when I was first running for the Senate, I heard a lot from seniors about this wretched donut hole, because one day you'd go in and pick up your prescription, and you had a $5 copay, and the next week you'd go in and pick up your prescription, and the pharmacist said, well, that'll be $642. That kind of wakes up somebody, and what's going on here? So one of the things that I fought very hard to get into the Affordable Care Act was getting rid of the donut hole. And so we're phasing it out, and I think next year is going to be its last year, and it's been getting smaller and smaller and more coverage every time. So we're really glad to be rid of that donut hole. It was not doing anybody any good, and mission accomplished.
We have two more questions.
Please.
Can you expand on the current standing of the Pell Grant, which provides the first 2 years of junior college for free for the next generation of young Rhode Islanders?
There are two things. There are Pell Grants, named after, there we go, yes, named after Senator Pell, our wonderful Senator Pell from here on Aquidneck Island, no less. And that provides a grant that a college student can use to offset their tuition. Now, years ago, it paid like 2/3 of college tuition. And I've met people who've said, you know, I could go to college with my Pell Grant and a job. And I didn't have to end up with college debt. The Pell Grant and the job was enough to get me through. These young guys over here are not going to be able to go through college with a Pell Grant like that. It pays a far smaller fraction of the college cost. So now you have to have Pell Grants and debt and work in order to afford college, but they're still there. And the Pell Grant is really important, and we keep fighting to increase it back to the buying power that it used to have. Separately from that, Governor Raimondo has started a program in Rhode Island where the first 2 years of community college are free. And that gives people a terrific opportunity to go to community college for 2 years, and if they see themselves as still college bound and want to finish a full 4-year degree, they transfer to URI. And now you've got your first 2 years free. Now you only have the 2 years of URI to finish out your 4-year program. Or if you want to go out into the workforce after 2 years, you can go straight into the workforce with no college debt. It was a really exciting program that Governor Raimondo led us on, and I'm delighted that she did it, and it's, I think, a terrific parallel to the Pell Grant in helping young people get the college education that they need to pay their taxes and have their jobs and raise their families and do what they should do. So, great question, and thanks.
Okay, the last one is, what tools and resources are provided to communities, law enforcement, and health professionals of Rhode Island to help end the public health crisis of opioid addiction?
We are still working to develop all of that. I worked with a guy named Rob Portman, who's a Republican senator from Ohio, and we did the biggest piece of opioid and addiction recovery legislation that Congress has ever done, just a few years ago, 1.5 years ago, 2 years ago now, I guess. And behind that, we pushed for considerable additional money to help with treatment. The first bunch of that money has already come through to Rhode Island. There's a second bigger slug of money that is coming through right now, and the regular appropriations are all going up. So what are the things that we're doing on the opioid crisis that are working? The first is we're getting that drug into more places where if you're overdosing, it can bring you back to life. It's called Narcan. It's an automatic injector or an inhaler, and we're making sure that in schools, police departments, police cars, all of our ambulances, all of our fire department vehicles, people have this. Because very often, the first time you find somebody, they're out and they're dying, and it's this drug that brings them back to life. So we want to make sure that that's everywhere. Then you want to make sure that people get treatment. And we've tried to make sure there are new medications that can help people who are opioid addicts to live without getting the drug. And so we've increased access to what's called medication-assisted treatment. And we've increased access to people for peer coaches, people who've been in abuse before and who are recovering and who know what it's like to be an addict. So right now, if you go to the Rhode Island Hospital emergency room, and if you're overdosing, they won't let you leave until they've checked you in with a peer recovery coach, somebody else who can stay in touch with you and help make sure that you stop using drugs and get into a recovery program and get that support. And that whole array of programs is steadily improving and steadily being funded more and more and more. We have a lot more work to do. We want to put as much money into this as possible. Way too many people are dying of these overdoses. Way too many people are having families ruined by this. And there is a path through it, through particularly the medication-assisted treatment, and then through continuing in these wonderful, wonderful recovery programs. I suspect that everybody in this room knows somebody who has been addicted either to alcohol or drugs. I certainly have people I love who have had to go and get addiction treatment. And so to have that happen, I think, is really important. The last thing I'll say about this is that one of the most important things that we can all do in this area is to understand that addiction is a mental condition. It's a medical problem, and it can be treated as a medical problem. For many years, we treated it as a moral problem, that somebody who got addicted to drugs was weak, didn't have good morals, was a bad person, and so then when people did become addicted, they wouldn't get help because they were ashamed. And little by little, we are correcting that. So to the extent that you have people you know in your life who have issues with addiction, let them know you're proud of them. Because it's not an easy thing to do to fight your way back and solve your addiction. It takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of strength. And the people who are doing that, we should embrace. We should be telling them we love them. We should be telling them we're proud of them. And we should be telling them that we will help them in any way we can to stay sober and strong. And by doing that, we can all make a difference on this crisis. So great question, and thank you.
Again, on behalf of our residents, Atria Aquidneck Place and Atria Senior Living, we want to thank you for coming, spending time with us today. We really appreciate it. And let's give Senator Whitehouse a round of applause.
Thank you.